The door closed with a sound so soft it might have been a whisper, but in the hollow of that February evening, it echoed like a gunshot through every room of our house. I stood in the kitchen, my hands submerged in dishwater that had gone cold, and listened to Marcus's car pull away from the curb. The engine's rumble faded into the distance, swallowed by the winter night, and I realised I was holding my breath. I had known it was coming. Perhaps I had known for months, maybe even years, in that quiet way we know things we're not yet ready to face. The signs had been there, written in the language of turned shoulders in bed, conversations that skimmed the surface like stones across water, never sinking deep enough to touch anything real. But knowing something is coming and experiencing its arrival were two entirely different countries. And I had just crossed that border without a passport, without a map, without any idea how to navigate this new terrain. My name is Evelyn Carter, and at 34 years old, I had built my entire adult life around the architecture of us. We had been together for 12 years, married for 8. The house we lived in, a modest 2-story colonial on Maple Street, had been chosen because it was halfway between his office and my mother's house. The furniture, the dishes, the very colour of the walls, all of it had been decided in those endless conversations that couples have, the negotiations that feel like intimacy, the compromises that feel like love. Now he was gone, and I was standing in a kitchen that suddenly felt like a museum, dedicated to a life that no longer existed. I pulled my hands from the water, washer, and dried them on a towel that read, "Home is where the heart is," in cheerful script. Sarah, my younger sister, had given it to us as a housewarming gift 6 years ago. I wondered where home was now, where my heart was now. The house settled around me with creaks and sighs, the old bones of it adjusting to the cold. Outside, snow had begun to fall again, the third significant snowfall of what had been a brutal winter. Through the window, above the sink, I could see the flakes drifting down through the glow of the streetlight, each one perfect and temporary and completely indifferent to my pain. I should call someone, I thought. Sarah, my mother, my best friend, Rachel. But the thought of forming words, of explaining what had just happened, of hearing the sympathy in their voices felt impossible. So instead, I walked through the house, turning off lights, until I reached the bedroom that was now just mine. That first night, I didn't sleep. I lay in bed, taking up the exact same amount of space I always had, as if my body hadn't yet received the message that it could spread out to claim the whole mattress. The ceiling fan spun slowly overhead, its shadow rotating across the ceiling like a lazy clock. I counted its revolutions. Somewhere around 300, the first light of dawn began to seep through the curtains. The next morning, a Saturday, I woke to the sound of my phone ringing. Sarah's name glowed on the screen. I let it go to voicemail. Then, my mother called. Then Rachel. I silenced the phone and placed it face down on the nightstand. For 3 days, I existed in a kind of suspension. I called in sick to work. I was a graphic designer at a small marketing firm downtown, and I moved through the house like a ghost haunting her own life. I ate crackers standing at the kitchen counter. I took long showers that used up all the hot water. I slept at odd hours, waking at 3 in the afternoon or midnight, time losing all meaning in the grey sameness of those February days. On the 4th day, Sarah used the key I had given her for emergencies and let herself in. I was sitting on the couch in sweatpants and one of Marcus's old t-shirts, staring at a nature documentary with the sound off. Polar bears moved silently across an icy landscape on the screen. "Evie," she said softly, and that was all it took. I broke. She held me while I sobbed, her hand making circles on my back the way our mother used to, when we were children and the world had been cruel. When I could finally speak, the whole story came tumbling out. How Marcus had been distant for months. How he had started working late, going to the gym, taking an interest in his appearance in a way he never had before. How I had convinced myself it was a good thing, that he was taking care of himself, that we all went through phases. "He said he still loves me," I told Sarah, my voice raw. "He said I didn't do anything wrong. He just said he couldn't breathe anymore, that he felt like he was drowning in the life we'd built, that he needed to figure out who he was outside of us." Sarah's jaw tightened. That's such bullshit. Such selfish, cowardly bullshit. Maybe, I said. But he's still gone. She stayed with me that day, bullying me into eating real food, opening curtains, picking up the takeout containers that had accumulated on the coffee table. She didn't try to make me feel better, with platitudes or promises that I'd be fine. She just stayed, and that was enough. Before she left that evening, she paused at the door. You know what you need to do? You need to get out of this house. Take some time. Go somewhere. I can't just leave, I protested. I have work. I have responsibilities. You have vacation days you never use. You have sick leave. Evie, you can't heal in the same environment where you got sick. She pulled on her coat. Think about it, Sinat. Please. After she left, I sat in the silence and thought about her words. The house did feel oppressive, every corner filled with memories, every object a reminder. The couch where we'd watched movies. The kitchen table where we'd eaten countless dinners. The bedroom where we'd made plans for a future that would now never come. That night, I opened my laptop for the first time in days. My inbox was full of concerned emails from work, from friends, from family. I ignored them all and instead searched for something I couldn't quite name. Cabins. Retreats. Somewhere remote. Somewhere I could be alone. I don't know what made me click on the listing. Maybe it was the photograph. A small cabin nestled in pine woods, smoke curling from its chimney against a backdrop of snow-covered mountains. Maybe it was the description. Rustic mountain cabin, completely secluded. Wood stove. Heat. No Wi-Fi. No cell service. Experience true solitude. True solitude. The phrase echoed in my mind. The cabin was in northern Vermont, a 4-hour drive from my house in Connecticut. It was available for month-long rentals, and the price was surprisingly reasonable. Before I could talk myself out of it, I filled out the booking form. The owner, a woman named Martha, called me within an hour. Just want to make sure you understand what you're getting into, she said, her voice warm but firm. It's truly isolated. The nearest town is 20 miles away. You'll need to bring all your supplies in. The road up to the cabin is maintained, but you'll need a vehicle with 4-wheel drive, especially this time of year. And there's no electricity except what you generate with the solar panels, which in winter won't be much. That's perfect, I heard myself say. Running from something or running towards something? Martha asked. I paused. I don't know yet. Fair enough. I'll email you the directions and the access code for the door. There's firewood stacked on the porch and more in the shed. There's a landline phone, but it only gets reception about half the time. It's connected to a satellite. Emergency numbers are posted by it. You take care of yourself up there, Evelyn. I gave notice at work that I'd be taking a leave of absence. My boss, a kind woman named Patricia who had been through her own divorce, didn't ask questions. Take the time you need, she said simply. Telling my mother was harder. She wanted me to come stay with her, to be surrounded by family. When I explained my plan, she was horrified. Alone? In the wilderness? In winter? Evelyn, that's not healthy. You shouldn't be alone right now. Maybe alone is exactly what I need to be, I said. What if something happens? What if you get hurt or sick or... Mom, I'll be fine. I'll check in when I can. But I need this. She must have heard something in my voice, some core of determination that surprised even me, because she stopped arguing. Okay, she said quietly. But you call me. Promise me you'll call. I promise. I spent 2 days preparing. I bought supplies like I was preparing for an expedition. Canned goods, rice, pasta, coffee, batteries, candles, matches, first aid supplies, books, journals, warm clothes, boots rated for sub-zero temperatures. I packed my car until the back seat and trunk were full, leaving barely enough room to see out the rear window. On a grey Tuesday morning in late February, I locked the door to the house on Maple Street and drove north. The landscape changed as I drove, the suburbs giving way to smaller towns, then to open farmland, then to the dense forests of Vermont. Snow lay thick on the ground, and the trees were bare-armed and patient, waiting for spring. I stopped once for gas and coffee at a small station where the attendant looked at my fully packed car and asked if I was moving. Something like that, I said. The final 20 miles were the hardest. The road narrowed, becoming a winding path through the mountains. Snow banks rose high on either side. I passed a few scattered houses, then nothing but trees. My phone lost service. The GPS stopped working. I relied on the printed directions Martha had emailed me, turning onto smaller and smaller roads, until finally I was on what was barely more than a trail, 2 tracks through the snow. And then I saw it. The cabin was smaller than it had looked in the photos, but somehow more perfect. It was built of dark logs with a peaked roof heavy with snow. Smoke did curl from the chimney. Martha had said she'd light the fire the morning of my arrival. The windows glowed with warm light from oil lamps inside. Pine trees surrounded it, and beyond them the mountains rose like ancient sentinels. I parked the car and sat for a moment, my hand still on the steering wheel. The silence was profound. No traffic sounds, no voices, no mechanical hum of modern life. Just the whisper of wind through pine needles and the soft plop of snow falling from branches. I'm here, I thought. Now what? I unloaded the car in the fading light, making trips back and forth, with my boots crunching in the snow. The cabin was simple inside. One main room that served as kitchen, living room and dining room, with a wood stove at its centre. A ladder led to a sleeping loft. A small bathroom with a composting toilet and a gravity-fed shower. The furniture was basic but well-made. A table, 2 chairs, a worn armchair by the stove, shelves lined with books. On the table, I found a note from Martha. Welcome. May you find what you're looking for. The wood needs to be loaded every few hours to keep the fire going. Don't let it go out. It's a pain to restart in this cold. Coffee and basics in the cupboard. Be well. At M. I made myself instant soup on the small propane stove and ate it sitting in the armchair, watching the fire through the stove's glass door. The flames danced and twisted, hypnotic. Outside, full dark had fallen, and the silence pressed in like a living thing. That first night in the cabin, I cried again, but this time it was different. The tears felt cleaner somehow, less about Marcus and more about everything. The loss of the future I had imagined. Yes, but also relief. Relief that I didn't have to pretend anymore. Relief that I could be messy and broken, and no one was there to see it or be disappointed by it. I slept deeply for the first time in weeks, bundled under heavy quilts in the loft. The sound of the fire crackling below like a heartbeat. I woke to a world transformed by snow. It must have fallen all night, because when I climbed down from the loft and looked out the window, everything was buried under at least a foot of fresh powder. The trees were frosted white, their branches bowed under the weight. The sky was that peculiar flat white that promises more snow to come. The fire had burned down to coals. I fed it carefully, adding kindling and then larger pieces of wood, watching it come back to life. There was something meditative about the process, the attention it required. I couldn't just set a thermostat and forget about it. The fire demanded care, presence, participation. I made coffee and stood at the window, watching the day slowly brighten. A deer emerged from the tree line, delicate and impossibly graceful, picking her way through the snow. She raised her head, sensing something, then continued on her path. I watched until she disappeared into the forest. The days developed their own rhythm. I woke with the light, built up the fire, made coffee. I read from the books on Martha's shelves, old novels, books about wilderness survival, poetry, philosophy. I wrote in the journal I had brought, page after page of thoughts and feelings I had been too busy or too afraid to examine. I learned to manage the fire, to read the signs of the weather in the sky and the behaviour of the animals. I learned to be comfortable with silence, with the absence of distraction, without my phone, without internet, without the constant buzz of notifications and messages. My mind began to settle. The anxious chatter that had been my constant companion for years began to quiet, but it wasn't easy. There were days when the loneliness felt crushing, when I wanted nothing more than to hear another human voice. There were nights when I lay in the loft and questioned everything, when I wondered if I had made a terrible mistake, if I was running away instead of dealing with my life. On one particularly difficult day, about a week into my stay, I found myself standing in the middle of the cabin, overcome by the urge to leave, to run back to Connecticut, to beg Marcus to come back, to promise I'd be different, better, whatever he needed me to be. Instead, I put on my coat and boots and snowshoes and went outside. The cold hit me like a slap, sharp and clarifying. I had never used snowshoes before, but Martha had left a pair hanging in the shed, and I strapped them on clumsily, figuring it out as I went. I set off into the woods with no destination in mind, just a need to move. The forest in winter was a study in contrasts. The stark black of tree trunks against the white of snow, the silence broken by the occasional call of a bird or the crack of ice. I walked for what might have been an hour, maybe more, my breath making clouds in the air, my cheeks burning with cold. I came to a small clearing and stopped. The snow here was unmarked. Perfect. I stood at its edge and realized I was crying. Again. But this time the tears felt different. I wasn't crying for what I had lost. I was crying for what I had never had, a sense of myself as separate, complete, whole, on my own. "I'm here," I said out loud, my voice strange in the silence. "I'm still here." The words hung in the air, then faded, but something inside me shifted. Some small, tight knot began to loosen. I walked back to the cabin as the sun was setting, the sky turning shades of pink and gold that seemed impossible, too beautiful for a world that also contained heartbreak. But there it was anyway, the beauty, indifferent to my pain, continuing regardless. That night, I made myself a real meal. Pasta with canned sauce, garlic bread made in a pan on the wood stove, a salad from the vegetables I had brought. I set the table as if I were dining with someone, lit candles, poured myself a glass of wine from the box I had packed. I ate slowly, savouring each bite, not eating over the sink or standing at the counter, but sitting properly, treating myself with care. After dinner, I built up the fire and pulled the armchair close. I picked up one of the books from the shelf, a collection of essays by a woman who had spent a year living alone in the woods. I read late into the night, feeling a kinship with this woman I would never meet. This woman who had also sought solitude as a kind of medicine. The weeks passed, and I began to change in ways I couldn't have anticipated. My body grew stronger from the physical demands of living this way, carrying wood, hauling water, walking through snow. My mind grew quieter, the constant narration of anxiety and worry fading to a whisper, then to silence, then to something else entirely, a kind of attention to the present moment that I had never experienced before. I started to notice things. The way the light changed throughout the day, the patterns frost made on the windows, the sounds of the forest, the chitter of squirrels, the drumming of woodpeckers, the rustle of wind through branches. I learned to identify bird calls, the harsh caw of ravens, the chickadee-dee-dee of their smaller cousins, the distant call of owls at night. I found myself thinking less about Marcus, less about what had happened, and more about what was happening now, in this moment. When thoughts of him did come, they were gentler, less sharp. I could remember good times without aching. I could acknowledge mistakes, mine and his, without drowning in blame or regret. One afternoon, in early March, I was sitting at the table writing when I heard a sound outside, the distinctive rumble of an engine. I went to the window and saw a truck pulling up, a woman at the wheel. Martha. She climbed out, a thermos in one hand and a bag in the other. I opened the door, suddenly aware of how I must look, hair wild, face bare of makeup, wearing layers of flannel and wool. "Thought I'd check on you," she said with a smile. Brought coffee and donuts, the real stuff. We sat at the table, and she poured coffee from her thermos into mugs. The donuts were still warm from a bakery in town. They tasted like heaven. "How are you managing?" she asked. "Better than I thought I would," I admitted. "It's been, I don't know, hard, but good hard, if that makes sense." She nodded. "It makes perfect sense. This place has a way of stripping things down to what matters. Some people can't handle that. They need the noise, the distraction. But some people, they thrive on it. They find themselves here. Is that what I'm doing? Finding myself? I asked, hearing the skepticism in my own voice. It sounds so cliché. Maybe, Martha said. Or maybe you're just learning to be with yourself. Learning that you're enough, just as you are, without someone else to define you. We talked for an hour about the cabin, about the winter, about her own story. She had bought this land after her husband died, built the cabin herself with help from friends, spent years living here before deciding to rent it out to people who needed it. People who need it, I repeated. That's how you see your renters? I do, she said. I don't advertise this place widely, but somehow the people who need it find it. You'd be surprised how many. Mostly women, actually. Women going through transitions. Divorce, grief, loss of some kind. They come here and they leave different. Stronger. After she left, I sat with her words. Stronger. Was that what I was becoming? I looked down at my hands. They were rougher than they had been, calloused from splitting wood from work. My nails were short and unpolished. These were hands that could do things, make things, fix things. These were capable hands. The next day, I decided to tackle a project I had been avoiding. The shed behind the cabin was full of wood that needed splitting. Martha had left a maul and a chopping block, but I had been intimidated by the task, unsure I could do it. I started slowly, watching videos in my memory of how it was supposed to be done. I had watched a YouTube video before leaving, in a moment of preparation. I set a log on the block, raised the maul, brought it down. The log split with a satisfying crack. I did another and another. My arms burned. My back ached, but I kept going, finding a rhythm, feeling something fierce and triumphant rise in my chest. I can do this, I thought. I can do hard things. That night, my muscles screamed, but I felt alive in a way I hadn't in years. I made dinner, did dishes, tended the fire, all with a sense of quiet accomplishment. I had done a thing that I thought I couldn't do. What else was I capable of? As March deepened, the days grew longer. The snow began to melt in patches, revealing earth beneath. I saw the first signs of spring, green shoots pushing through the ground, birds returning from the south, the ice on the stream behind the cabin beginning to crack and flow. I had been at the cabin for almost a month. My leave from work was running out. Soon I would have to make decisions about what came next, but I wasn't ready yet. I called Patricia from the satellite phone during one of its working moments and asked for more time. She granted it without hesitation. I called Sarah and my mother, both of whom had been frantic with worry despite my periodic check-ins. I assured them I was fine. Better than fine, actually. They didn't quite believe me, but they stopped pushing me to come home. I didn't call Marcus. He had sent messages, emails which I had seen during my drive up when I still had service. They had said the things people say. He was sorry, he hoped I was okay. He wanted to talk when I was ready, but I wasn't ready. Maybe I never would be, and that was okay. One evening, I was sitting outside on the porch. The weather had warmed enough to make this possible, when I saw a bear. She was far enough away not to be a danger, but close enough for me to see her clearly. She was massive and dark and moved with a kind of ponderous grace. Behind her, 2 cubs tumbled and played, wrestling in the snow. I watched them for a long time, barely breathing, afraid to break the spell. The mother bear dug in the earth, showing her cubs how to find food. They mimicked her movements, clumsy and enthusiastic. She was teaching them to survive. When they finally moved on, disappearing into the forest, I sat in the gathering dark and thought about survival, about what it meant to learn to take care of yourself, to be both teacher and student, mother and child to yourself. That night, I wrote in my journal, I came here broken, thinking I needed to be fixed. But maybe I wasn't broken at all. Maybe I was just waiting for permission to become myself. The next morning, I woke with a clarity I hadn't felt in years. I knew it was time to start planning my return to the world, not because I had to, but because I wanted to. I had learned what I came here to learn. I had stood alone through a winter, and I had not broken. I had bent. Yes, I had struggled, but I had also grown stronger, more sure, more myself. I spent the next week preparing to leave. I cleaned the cabin thoroughly, restocked the wood, left it as I had found it. I packed my things slowly, deliberately, taking time to acknowledge what this place had given me. On my last night, I sat by the fire and wrote a letter. Not to Marcus, he didn't need my words anymore, but to myself, to the woman I had been when I arrived, scared and broken and desperate. I told her that everything would be okay, that she was enough, that she would survive this and come out the other side not just intact, but transformed. I sealed the letter in an envelope and tucked it into my journal. The morning I left, Martha came by to say goodbye. She looked at me for a long moment, then smiled. "You look different," she said. "I feel different," I replied. "What will you do now?" I'd thought about this question a lot over the past week. I'm going home to Connecticut, to my house, but I'm going to make some changes. Big ones. I'm going to keep the house. I realised I love it, and it's mine, not ours. I'm going to redecorate, make it reflect who I actually am, not who we were as a couple. I'm going to go back to work, but I'm going to ask for the projects I actually want, not just the ones I'm assigned. And I'm going to start painting again. Painting? I used to paint before Marcus, before I decided that art wasn't practical, that I should focus on graphic design because it was more marketable. But I'm going to paint again. Maybe just for myself, maybe more. I don't know yet, but I'm going to try. Martha hugged me, fierce and brief. "You're going to be just fine, Evelyn." The drive home was different from the drive up. I stopped at the same gas station, and the same attendant was there. "Moving back?" he asked with a grin. "Something like that," I said, and this time I smiled. The house on Maple Street was exactly as I had left it, but I walked through it with new eyes. I saw where I would paint the walls, where I would rearrange furniture. I saw my studio in the spare room that had been used for storage. I saw my home, not our home, mine. That evening, Sarah came over with pizza and wine. She took one look at me and started crying. "Oh my God, you look amazing! What happened to you up there?" I thought about how to answer, about the cabin and the fire and the snow, about the deer and the bear and the long silent days, about learning to split wood and carry water and tend to my own needs, about discovering that I could be alone without being lonely, that solitude could be a gift rather than a punishment. "I learned how to stand alone," I said finally. "The winter taught me." She hugged me tight. "I'm so glad you went. I was worried, but God, Evie, you're different. You're more you than I've seen you in years." Over the following weeks, I threw myself into transformation. I painted the bedroom a deep teal colour I had always loved, but Marcus had vetoed. I bought new sheets, new curtains. I rearranged furniture until the house felt like mine. I set up the spare room as a studio and bought canvases and paints. The first time, I put brush to canvas. My hand shook. But then, the paint touched the white surface, and something in me released. Colour and form began to flow. I painted the cabin. I painted the bear and her cubs. I painted the way snow fell through lamplight and how ice formed on windows. I painted my grief and my healing and my solitude and my strength. I went back to work, and Patricia welcomed me with open arms. When she asked what I wanted to work on, I told her the truth. I wanted the creative projects, the ones that challenged me, not just the routine assignments. To my surprise, she agreed immediately. "I've been waiting for you to ask for years," she said. "Marcus reached out several times. He wanted to talk, to meet, to explain. I agreed to meet him once at a coffee shop on a Saturday afternoon in April. He looked different, thinner, tired, uncertain in a way he never had been. 'You look good,' he said, and he sounded surprised. 'Thank you, I feel good. I've been wanting to talk to you about us, about maybe trying again. I think I made a mistake, Evie. I think I was going through something and I panicked and I held up my hand. Marcus, I don't want to try again.' He looked shocked. But I thought if I gave you time, if we both had space. I did need time and space, and I used it to figure out that I don't want to go back. I'm not angry anymore. I'm not even hurt, not really. I'm actually grateful." "Grateful?" He looked like I had slapped him. "You did me a favor. You showed me that I had built my whole life around you, around us, and I had lost myself in the process. This past month, I found myself again. I found out that I'm enough. Just me. Alone. And I don't want to give that up." We talked a little longer, working out the practical details of divorce, of separating our lives completely. It was civil, even kind. When we parted, I felt nothing but relief. Spring turned to summer. I painted and worked and spent time with friends and family. I took another trip to the cabin in June just for a weekend, and it felt like visiting an old friend. The mountains were green now, the streams flowing fast with snowmelt. I hiked and painted and sat on the porch in the evenings, reading by lamplight. Sarah met me there for part of the weekend, wanting to see the place that had transformed me. We cooked together, talked late into the night, sat in comfortable silence watching the stars. "Are you happy?" she asked me on our last night. I thought about it. "Yes," I said, and realised it was true. Not the giddy happiness of new love, or the contentment of settled routine, but something deeper. The happiness of knowing myself, of being enough, of standing alone without fear. By the time autumn came, painting the world in shades of amber and crimson, I had created a life that was entirely mine. I had friends and work I loved and hobbies that fulfilled me. I had learned that alone didn't mean lonely, that solitude could be a source of strength rather than a sign of failure. I hung the paintings from my time at the cabin in my home, vivid reminders of what I had survived, what I had learned. When people asked about them, I told them the truth. They were self-portraits in a way. They were images of a woman learning to stand alone, learning to find strength in solitude, learning that she was enough. On the first anniversary of the day Marcus left, I didn't cry. Instead, I went to the spare room, my studio now, and painted. I painted a woman standing alone in snow, surrounded by pine trees, her face turned up to falling flakes. Her expression wasn't sad. It was peaceful, strong, certain. I titled it Winter's Gift and hung it in my bedroom where I could see it every morning when I woke. They had thought I would break when they left. Marcus, everyone who knew us, maybe even me. But I didn't break. I bent, I struggled, I fought, and in the end, I stood alone, not because I had to, but because I learned I could. Because the winter had taught me that I contained within myself everything I needed to survive, to thrive, to become. I was whole. I was enough. I was mine. And that was the greatest gift of all.